Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy.
Okay, well, we are back here on Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism, podcast with Mick Mulroy and myself, Adam Piercy. Welcome back, everybody, to the podcast, or thank you for joining us if this is your first time. Today, we were going to talk about violence in the political sphere and violence when we should be choosing discourse, without going into details, because we don't really want to do that here. It has been a tough week, I think, for us here, at least in North America, with violence in the political sphere, or with political or public figures. And so Mick and I were speaking in the week, and we were thinking this is probably a really good topic to talk about, because I think we both have views on it that we would love to think could help someone. So, but Mick, I'd love to get your initial feelings of this topic before we start pitching our conversation around what we choose to do in response to it. So, what's your take on the last little bit exactly, just to sort of set the stage for us?
Sure, Adam. Before we start, for those that are watching on YouTube, that picture or the rub behind me is a rub that I got in Greece. I work with their special forces. It is the rub from Thermopylae. It's the famous "Go tell the Spartan stranger passing by that here obedient to their laws we lie." So if you're wondering what that is the historic, I think one of the first, if not the first, war memorial. But the point of it is, they follow the laws. Society's made up of laws, even to the point where they all ended up under that plaque. So I think that's an important place to start with, that when you are part of a society, you agree to abide by its laws, right? So no matter what you think or how mad you might think you are, you still have a absolute requirement not to take things into your own hands. That as long as you live in a democratic state and you have fair processes, that's what you agreed to live by. But specifically to the growing, I think, and we were just talking, going back to Julius Caesar, right? So this isn't brand new, but it is growing. And in the United States, I'd just point out two important factors. One, and ABC, who some of you guys know I work for, did a study, and in the 80s, they found out that people started moving to places based on their political ideology. Prior to that, most congressional districts were fairly evenly split one way or the other. So you might have 55 to 45 Republican or Democrat, right? So what does that do? That means you have to listen to the other side, right? 45% still a pretty substantial portion of your constituency if you are a representative. Now it's like 95-5 one way or the other, because people started moving to areas based on their political affiliation. So red states got redder, blue states got bluer in the U.S. Dialogue of how we label things. And what does that do? Well, what does that mean is that essentially every political person is now being more pushed to their extreme on their side, right? Because if you have 95% of Republican or Democrat, then the primary is actually where the election happens, because there isn't really any opposition. And so it pushes people, whether it's far left or far right, it's still far, right? Not necessarily in the center. And so that makes it very difficult to listen to the other side. And quite frankly, it doesn't even serve representatives. And this, I'm talking about the U.S., but this could be any democracy. It doesn't even serve them well to talk to the other side and work with the other side in Congress, because it'll be used against them in their next election. So when you used to hear things like Ronald Reagan, a Republican, Tip O'Neill, a Democrat, Speaker of the House, have sharing a pint at Murphy's in Old Town Alexander while President Reagan was the president. I mean, that just doesn't happen anymore, right? And so there has been a sea shift. And on top of that, you have in the United States radical groups. So not the political folks, but radical on both sides of the aisle that are armed to the teeth, both sides of the aisle. The left took a little while to get there, but they realized the right was getting very well armed. There's more weapons, and I'll be straight up, I own weapons because I'm not into unilateral disarmament, to be frank. Not that I have any affinity for weapons, guns is what I'm talking about. But there's more guns in the United States than there are per capita than there are in Yemen, for example, a country that's been at war for decades. And with it, so you have a growing radicalization. You have the means to carry out violence, and you're seeing things like the politician in Minnesota that was killed along with her husband, like the influencer who was killed at the University of or the university in Utah. Both horrible. Both should be treated the same way. So I think this is how Stoicism would deal with these issues.
Yeah.
I think to start with, and I'll throw it back to you after I make the case. If you look at Zeno's Republic, right, an answer to Plato's Republic, it was revolutionary in many aspects. But I think it would promote, even with the revolutionariness of the time, that's a word, it promotes a centric, kind of moderate version of politics. First of all, it promotes equality. So every class has a say, whether you're male or female or, race or ethnic group or what have you. It really does champion the idea of the universal citizen, which if you take it into geopolitical sense, that's obviously one thing. But what the way since I'm taking it is, you treat everybody like a brother, right? So even Martin Luther King used it from Stoicism. If we don't treat either everybody like your brother, we're going to all end up dying like fools, to paraphrase him. This is a concept that I think we're losing entirely. Obviously, he means brothers and sisters in the Republic. He especially, basically not treating everybody like an enemy. Othering is a term I've heard and I'm going to use. Is just basically dehumanizing the opposition, and you can hear it right now in response to this horrible assassination shooting on this campus. People are immediately talking about revenge and these evildoers who I assume they're just talking about the other side, since this was an individual and it wasn't a group. That is also something that's really not in keeping with the Stoic tradition. And, Aurelius said, the best way to get back at your enemy is not to be like them. Yeah. And then, of course, the concept that under wisdom, that we have the ability to listen to one another and not just wait our turn to blast the other person in our views. So I think there's many things that Stoicism can bring to the table to try to mitigate this growing, and it's not just here, but the United States just tends to be extreme in so many different things, good and bad. But certainly is happening here, where people simply don't talk to each other. And then, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too. Social media, right? So social media is not just the growing separation of society and weapons. It's also social media. So those are my initial thoughts. Adam, back to you.
For sure. I mean, and what's interesting that when we talk about this, right, is people sometimes look at philosophy, especially ancient philosophy, and they detach it from now. But you and I were talking before we started recording, like this is not a new concept, right? That violence is happening in an area that's meant for discourse to happen. And I should say too, just in case, right? Like when we say discourse, we mean talking. We mean literally talking, just talking to each other, right? And we were citing an example before about there's a very famous, very very public political assassination that occurred in the ancient world, which was Julius Caesar, right? And so this is not a new thing. They meaning the Stoics, but also we as humans have been fighting this since the beginning of time, probably. So I don't know if it's going to get solved immediately, but I think that Stoicism has been dealing with this so much, right? We're in some ways, and because we look danger and we look this stuff right in the face, that sometimes I think we should take lessons from those periods. So, but when it comes to Stoicism and how it approaches this, I mean, the first thing I would say is I can go right to Marcus, for example. So Marcus is in his life the most powerful person in the Roman Empire, in what is essentially then considered the world, although there's of course way more than just the Mediterranean. But Marcus, and this is one of I always remember this quote that comes up, which I'm going to cite it specifically. This is Book 2, paragraph 16. In the next place, the soul does violence to itself when it turns away from any man, or even moves towards him with the intention of injuring, such as are the souls of those who are angry. So you have someone who, like Hadrian, could literally stab somebody in the eye, and he would not face any persecution over it. And he is deciding that violence is wrong, especially when that violence is physical violence with the intention of injuring. And so I think right from the get-go, Stoics end up being, I wouldn't say they're pacifists, but because that like I've struggled being a pacifist with this in my life, but what I would say is that they are definitely pushing towards the idea of gentleness. There's another quote about gentleness from Marcus where he says, "Gentleness is stronger than weakness. It's on the other end of the spectrum from weakness, and you must enter these things with gentleness." So my hope that I would hear someone take away from these kinds of reading is that they would see the truth, because I am someone who is nonviolent. I am someone who is a pacifist, and I feel Stoicism resonated with me so early on with this concept. So I hope that people would look at this and say, okay, if you're upset, if you're angry, great, but the best revenge is not to be violent, and the best revenge is to not be like that. And therefore, violence is just not the answer. It's simple to say that. I know people are very upset right now, especially from this past period of time that, not to go too specific, because I do think this is more universal. But my first take on that for sure is like, you have this person who could erase someone's existence with a word, and he decides to say to himself, remember that violence is bad. It's not the right thing to do. And I think everybody, whether you follow this philosophy or not, can take a step away and say, that's probably a good point to make, as it were. So that's my first real take on it.
So on your point, certainly when Stoics aren't passive,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think some of the most significant military leaders in history called themselves specifically Stoics, but I also think they believed in reason over rage, right? That's
Yes.
kind of the image of a Stoic.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was watching, it's called The King. It was about Henry V last night. And he is picking his war council, right? So like his Secretary of Defense. And if you don't remember, Henry V was one of the most significant wartime kings in English history. He picked his friend Falstaff, John Falstaff, and he was a common soldier, officer, leader, and a war hero. And he was reluctant to take it. And Henry V was in a room full of other advisors who may have been questioning his choice too. But his point of why he chose him was not because he adored war. It was because he despised war. right? And why did he despise war? Because he had been in it personally.
Yeah.
So it's easy to be an armchair general where the consequences of decisions don't fall onto you. And I think I bring that up because I think the Stoic is the Falstafs, right? So they have the capacity to defend themselves and certainly to bring violence, but they have the concept of reason over rage, and that's where we're missing right now. We've watched very senior people in the last few days talking about a war. It's like, well, who are you fighting?
Yeah.
Talking about, retaliation, borderline, calling for some kind of reciprocity and violence. Look, I understand being mad. I've had friends killed, and I wasn't the most reasonable person at the time. That happened, certainly. But there is a responsibility that you have to look inside yourself and say, okay, and I'll just do it to myself rather than focus on other people. Am I the one that's perpetuating this? Do I just talk about, and I know you're like center left and I'm like center right, but do I just highlight the problems on the other side? Is that what I do? Do I just focus on it when I feel almost like some kind of crazy sports type affiliation, where I ignore the issues on my own side? I downplay them. Do I repost things without knowing if it's true or not? Do I just look for anything that meets my specific agenda? These are all things that I have to look at myself, because if I am doing those things, I am part of the problem. Like, I might not be out there, crawling a rooftop with a 30-06, and I certainly wouldn't be that person, but you are contributing to it if you don't hold everybody accountable for their own actions and be equally outraged when the other side commits violence. If you're selectively, then you're almost worse. You're the little weasel in your house, your basement, that's promoting this with zero consequences to yourself. Like, it's some kind of, so if I again focus on myself, if I do that, and I don't think I do, but to the extent that I ever get into a position where I'm just highlighting the problems of the other side, particularly when it comes to political violence, then I think I need to step back and fix myself.
Yeah, and I think right now we are dealing with an interesting thing that again relates to a period of time that Seneca and Marcus and Epictetus all lived in, which is the time of what we sort of think of them as political talking heads or social media influencers, but back in the day they would have been called sophists, right?
Yes.
And I do think this, and you and I talked about this before, I think this is a really important topic to talk about, because I get being angry, right? But we have to be careful when that anger is present, because, as Seneca would call it, anger is a temporary madness, and therefore you're losing reason, you're losing conscious thought in many ways, right? Anybody who's been in a fit of rage, and we talked about this on a different episode, where I was in a very angry moment where I was defending my family in a circumstance. It was one of those things where you kind of wake up from it later and you're like, man, how did that get there? Now you're present, right? I was present in mine, but many times you're not. And that's where you have to be careful, because we know that people are angry, but there are what we would call back in the day sophists out there. So what is a sophist? A sophist is someone who they're very good at saying things. They're trained in rhetoric. So rhetoric is like how to talk to somebody to sway them to your point. And I'm not saying these influencers aren't educated. That's not what it is. But it's like, it feels like we're getting to the point right now where we are ignoring fact, or we are ignoring reason for the thing that sounds cool in the 3-second soundbite on Instagram or YouTube or Spotify or whatever it is. And I think we have to be very careful of that, right? We have people calling for things right now that I think you and I would both agree on this one. They're calling for things that will not make this situation any better. It feels like escalation. It feels like further polarization, which is a really interesting word because it's actually an engineering word, right? Which is to polarize something is for it to have two ends, basically, right? A positive and a negative. So a magnet is polar if it has two poles. And so, it's this, these things are getting everything sort of blown to this proportion. I'm not going to say out of proportion because obviously violence has been horrible this last period of time, but things are being blown to this proportion that it's significantly more than it used to be. And so, I think for me, I would say you have to beware sophists right now. Socrates was the one I said that. I said it earlier, and then I think you recognized that quote. I couldn't find it immediately, but beware sophists is definitely a phrase that has always kicked up in my mind. That doesn't mean don't listen to people, though. I think we have to be clear. Like, that doesn't mean to not listen to people or call everyone sheeple or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. But when someone presents an argument, it's okay to not be. It's okay to take that argument and listen to it, and it is okay to disagree with it. And if you're giving an argument and someone disagrees with you, that's okay. It should be okay. Right? The discourse that we have, I mean, we've sort of talked about this in other episodes that may or may not have been heard yet, which is, I firmly believe that one of the things that makes us humans and no longer great apes is that we have the ability to discuss. We have the ability to disagree. We aren't operating in a primal instinct phase. Our consciousness allows us to talk about other things. And I think that's what we're asking for here is for people to use that kind of thing. So that's how I look at it right now, right? Is we have to beware this soundbite because it's not making it any better. We have to ask ourselves what society we wish to live in. And I'm not, and you and I have talked about this. I'm not saying society like the society of the US or Canada, the society of us as human beings. We have to make a decision as to how we're going to live that way. And so, there are great talkers out there who are using really good evidence, but you have to ask yourself right now, right? If you're making a decision based on your anger or fear, there's a lot of fear going on right now. Or if it's just rhetoric meant to get 3-second sound bites or whatever, right? There were claims made about things from this week where I was like, we don't even know all the details of this event that's happened from this violent event. And people are making claims to what it is. And you go, you know what? I'm just going to wait. I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to listen to the news and I'm going to see if I get any updates on this so that I don't make any snap judgments. And I think I would urge everybody to do that. I want to call out one thing, which is a friend of the podcast, Ryan Holiday, has been talking. He has a new challenge coin out, and it's about taking a pause and taking a moment instead of losing yourself to anger right now. He's sort of on an anger kick right now with his daily Stoic emails and podcasts. And I would urge everyone to think about it like that, right? Like, take a breath, take a second. We have to be able to get back to this place of discourse. So, anyways, that sounds like a plea, but I mean, as a human being, I am frustrated and feeling quite worried about the normalization of violence we're having right now.
Yeah, and ultimately, what it means is, if you look at the Stoic versus the sophist is just about winning the argument, right? So there's no real back and forth. It's not a dialogue where there's a kind of mutual agreement to get to the heart of the matter without any conceived ideas or already made up minds. Yeah. And so very little ever gets done in legislature, right? I mean, they basically don't do much other than, and now just become social media proponents.
Yeah.
I would say there's another part to this. It starts down the totalitarian route. So if you have political violence, and it gives the one side at least the opportunity to start cutting down on free speech, right? So you start hearing a lot more terms like who's a patriot, what's a patriot. And me and Tom Morris, another friend, I think, of the podcast, certainly a friend of mine, former philosophy professor at Notre Dame, I should say, as in the school in the U.S., we wrote a whole thing about patriotism, right? It's called a misunderstood virtue. It starts to become a name for people that agree with me, right? Politically, that's what your definition of a patriot is, and not people who are, I would say, invested in thought and action in the well-being of the society they live in. That's a patriot, right? So, and you're starting to hear the words used in the sense of the former, which is, you disagree with me, you're not a patriot. Patriots shouldn't have the same rights as other, or non-patriots shouldn't have the same rights as patriots. Therefore, I'm going to take things away from you, like your freedom of speech, your freedom of association, and even your freedom, period. Right. So that's another danger that we're falling into on both sides of the aisle. Right. So,
Yeah.
I could point to, federalizing National Guard forces to be used against citizens, but I could also point out the overdone of, political correctness when it comes to what you can and can't say. Somebody else determining what words are appropriate or not appropriate.
Yeah.
On college campuses, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's where we see a lot of, I think, the far left negative, in my opinion, influence on society is they start to become totalitarians themselves, right? With the word police and such like that. So it's like almost like when people get too far out on each fringe, they end up, together. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah,
like
circle back around. Yeah.
yeah, you guys are starting to look and sound a lot alike. I mean, whereas all the moderates in the middle are like, can't we just try to solve, the problem with education, for example?
Yeah.
Because the education in the
Yeah.
United States is plummeting. Kids are not getting taught their scores, if that's reflective of how education is going, of
Yeah.
falling through the floor, for example.
Yeah.
And none of this is helping. They just want to promote. And then, of course, it's a promotion of their ideology in even, lower level education, right?
Yeah.
How about they just learn history, science, math, right? Get all
Yeah.
that stuff down first before they get flooded with unvalidated political opinions or just political opinions, which they can come with
Yeah.
their own. Or they learn logic and reason. Can you imagine that, doing that
Yeah.
before they get thrust into the realm of political sophistry?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a time of not very. I don't remember there being standardized tests, right? I mean, in Canada we don't have the SATs as a standard thing you take. You take them if you want to go to the U.S. for school for post secondary school, and it felt more. We had a lot of subjects to cover, right? Like I remember we covered the civil rights movement, and not that like we had we had to do civil rights in Canada, right? We had while slavery ended in the British Empire far before it did in the United States, it existed before that, and there was there was all these other things going on, right? That we learned about from the world, but we first and foremost also learned like how to think about stuff, right? Like we were drilled on the Socratic method, and the Socratic method says that you basically come up with a premise, right? Or you come up with a proposition, and then you have to investigate it to see whether or not it's right, right? And so the opinion's kind of taken out of it, and you sort of look at it from this sort of tiered approach of like, let's start big picture, like, am I even close to the right path? And you kind of drill down. You're like, okay, well, it's more that I need to be over here, and so I'm going to drill down a little further. And no matter what, I think because you and I have talked about this already, we kind of agree that like we got to get back to the basics on that one, right? Like, because you talked about that circle. I laughed because I saw an interesting interchange meme with someone, and there was an anti-vaxxer who was like, look, all I'm saying is, why don't we just come up with something where someone's exposed to a little piece of the virus, and then their immune system learns about it and makes it better. And you go, you just invented vaccines, right? Like, so now you're coming full circle, right? And that's because, and the thing is that's because people aren't starting with the premise of maybe something is bad or maybe something is good. They're sort of saying, this is terrible. I know this is horrible. And then they're going from there. And that freedom of thought, I think, is really important. And to go back to what we're talking about as violence, especially violence with politics, we have to think about the democratic values here that make up the countries that you and I are in, right? And that's really important here. This ability to talk about things is, and I would actually say one of the core values for democracy is truth, right? Because it is the rule of the many, right? In the sense, like, we're all voting on things, and the U.S. is a republic, and we're a constitutional monarchy, and there's very big similarities there. But ultimately, it is about truth. It's about, and that's something I think that's very important here. And it's not truth about what happened. It's about the truth about what objectively is true that is going to make things better, right? Like, if we found out, for example, that I don't know, almonds are objectively, factually true, bad for society, then we should probably take a stance against almonds. I got nothing against Big Almond. I'm just going to say that, but I think it's a very important thing to take. It's based on factual evidence and truth. We have to be very careful that we're not just listening to things that make us feel better, because sometimes the truth hurts, right? And being in a democracy, sort of the price that you pay, and I've said this to people before, and they kind of, I guess it makes me sound not militant, but like hardliner, is I'll say the price you pay in a democracy is vigilance. You just can't, you have to always be vigilant to stick to, looking for the truth and whatnot. And I know it's hard. I know it's not easy, but it's worse to turn your back on these things, right? And just go with whatever makes it feel good. Like, I hate to quote Dumbledore from Harry Potter, but I interestingly used this quote with my partner's little girl recently, which was, he says, "The choice will soon come between what's right and what's easy." And that's a really important point to take in some ways, because it's sometimes the truth, the better thing is the hard thing, right? Mm-hmm. And in this circumstance, when you go back to, what's that? The obstacle is the way. Absolutely. So looking back on this, people are angry. And the easy thing when you're angry is to stay angry. It's to stay in that pit of rage and become worse. And the hard thing is to say, I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to remove myself from the situation. I'm going to take a deep breath, whatever it takes. Look in the mirror, if you're quoting the Ryan Holiday coin. And you say, what are we going to do here? And I think it's important, like asking yourself, what's the truth in that circumstance? Because it's such a big thing. I don't want people to run off the handle while not looking at what's true, instead of going with what makes them feel better. Anyways, that's a bit of a rant, but I'm stuck in this cycle all the time of just coming back to, like, what's the right thing to do? Well, you're not going to know it if you don't look at the truth.
Yeah. And, sometimes you can't control what you feel, right? So you just get mad. But the question then is, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
The easiest quick answer, if you're in a fit of rage internally, just stop talking. I mean, that's what I do. That is the easiest and quickest way that you can control, right? You can't control necessarily that you get angry. It just happens, right? But you can control whether you start talking. You can control whether you just keep making it worse. So I would say the first thing is, stop and reflect, which is another way to just zip it. Just zip it. And then if you really want to be a wise person, and not just a person that repeats talking points that you hear from your political side, don't have a preconceived notion of what the answer is. Have the ability to change your mind. Ask yourself, have I ever changed my mind? Am I actually listening to the other side? I'm not saying you have to change your mind, because there's no reason to believe that the other person's always right and you're always wrong. But if you're not even like taking in new info, then you're a propagandist. You're not actually, participating in the dialogue. So that's the second thing. One, if you can't just have a civil discourse and stop talking. Two, really reflect on yourself and whether, are you actually trying to get to the heart of the matter, or are you're just trying to repeat points? A concept that's maybe not forefront when people think of Stoicism, but I certainly agree with it. Is I think it was Aurelius. You don't have to have an opinion about everything, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they have to have an opinion about everything now because it's all
I
on
know.
social media, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on a lot of stuff, so when I get asked something that hits, on my analyst role, like on economics, I'd rather hear an economist than me talk about economy because I don't feel that I have much to add. I want to know it affects
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
100%. So there is times when you should just be quiet and listen. And people who spent 8 years trying to learn about a topic, whether it's vaccines or the economy or whatever, you don't have to have an opinion on everything. So don't feel you need to. Don't feel you need to weigh in, especially if you're not going to do the due diligence to actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And some of these topics, I mean, that's how societies work, right? People are specialized in certain things, so others don't have to. I have no idea, to be frank, how we're talking right now, and you're in Canada, I'm in the United States, and I can see you move almost instantaneously from the time you move, and you sound like you, which is always, since a little kid, I could figure out how you could translate words into something that could go somewhere else and then be the same words. I still don't really understand how I can tell it's you, like your
Right.
voice, like sound like you,
Yeah.
right? So I'm sure somebody can write in and tell us, which I'd be really interested in. But my point isn't that. It isn't about that. It's about there are people that specialize in society so that a benefit of others and vice versa. So we don't have to have over the top opinions on something we don't even know, right? And it just adds to the cacophony of just untethered rhetoric that's going
Yeah.
on right now, where people are saying things that either factually aren't true, didn't check, or they deliberately are promoting things that are untrue just to, make their side sound, I don't know, better,
Yeah.
whatever that means.
Yeah. And there's an interesting side to talk about with that, right? Like it's happening a lot in Canada, and I think it might be happening other places as well. But I know for a fact that this happens in Canada, where going from the Democratic position, there are candidates that don't go to the debates here, which is super weird to me. Like, so you're in a riding. I won't even say anything because I'll make up a name. You're in the riding of Elrond or something. I'll make up a name. And there's three candidates, right? Middle, left, right, and one of them decides they're not going to attend any of the debates, right? For the candidates in that riding. And for me, when that happens, I go to this point where I go, why are they doing that? Right? Are they afraid to talk to us? Right? And that makes me very skeptical versus the people who are there standing up, taking the questions. I sit there and I go, okay, I can talk to that person. And that makes me feel better. And, because also as someone I am, you highlighted me as center left, which I would say that I am, but I am usually an undecided for a little point because I want to know what's going on. And this is why you were talking, I were talking about this. We got to urge people to do this more, right? It's like, I sit there and I go, I want to pick the candidate that has all the things that I think are good for the society,
Yeah.
right? That's what I look at first. And so it's very interesting to me when I start seeing people not go to debates because I'm going like, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid? Right? There's a phrase in the space program world, which is what's visible is reality. So they might not be afraid at all, but it certainly doesn't look like that when they're not going to come out and do a common topic debate with their peers, I would call it, on the ticket for a political election of some kind, right? And I always end up going with the idea of like they must be afraid or they must be hiding something. Sometimes they're sick, right, or whatever. That's fine, but there are times where they don't show up, and you go, why not, right? They work for us. Like I hate to be that guy, but they do work for us, right? And
right, or they're trying to work for you.
They're trying to work for you. And I would expect that, it's a public office. I would expect that they would have to do something like that. So I ask a lot of people when they're listening to these things, I say do you have the ability to question this? Like, if you question it, what happens? Like, can you talk about this stuff? So anyways, it's an interesting thing that I'm seeing here. It's a trend that's growing I think in politics in general in some places. And I'm like, that's so weird, especially when they don't go to any debates in that riding and they still get elected. And you go, how does that happen? But
yeah. And I think part of the reason why I think you answered your question there, at least from what I've seen, is the politicians that decide not to go to the debate already think they're going to win. So
yeah,
there's no upside to the debate, right? They're already ahead in the polls, but it really defeats the whole purpose of why is it you're running for office then,
yeah,
right? I mean, if it's not about the ideas that you're going, why go?
yeah,
I don't know where Stoicism would fall on this, but that's why I like the idea of term limits. I think elected office for helping decide the nation's laws or actually decide the nation's law should be more of a service than
yeah,
a career. Because once it becomes a career, it becomes corrupt in the sense that they have all the decision making power. It's one of the reasons why they don't want politicians, at least in the United States, to be able to individually trade stocks because they can totally affect, which stocks do well based on the legislation they pass on the industries they pass. And they're going to know stuff that nobody else does. And people are shocked at how well that the politicians do picking stocks. Well, I don't think they have any more, you know, smarts when it comes to that than anybody else. I think they just have information that others don't have. So not to
yeah.
get off the track, but the point
Well,
being is there's part of, I think, political violence comes from political corruption. It becomes from careerists whose job becomes staying in power. If you are limited in the time you can even be there, then I think you would be more focused on making a difference based on, whatever you think is right or wrong. Go in there and do that, and then go back and get a job, get your old job, get a real job.
yeah,
Yeah, seriously.
yeah.
I mean, that's how it
No,
started in the U.S. I mean, if you read about Abe Lincoln, like it was rough. They had to go and live in dorms, basically, right? It was
yeah,
it was a service when he was a congressman from Illinois, right? He
yeah,
had to figure out how to live in a dorm and share a bed and all this stuff. We've gone from that to where everybody in our Senate, especially, is multimillionaires.
hmm,
Not really representative of the rest of the United States.
yeah.
Um, so the egalitarian view from Zeno's Republic, I think, would be opposed to that.
I
And if
think
you
so.
if you poll people, I mean, it's good enough for the president. Why would it be good enough from the congressman from the 16th district of New York, right? If you poll, that is very popular, at least in my country, is having term limits simply because it'll start making, I think, the service part of it more of an actual service and less of a way to, promote your own self-interest over decades and decades. And of course, these folks stick around longer than anybody in any other uh, part of society,
Yeah,
right? You don't see, somebody running a company usually at 82, you know.
yeah,
Um, Not if you can, you can. I'm not. This is an
yeah, yeah.
anti-age,
We're
but
we're not being
I mean,
ageist. It's just
yeah.
it's an uncommon thing you see. I
Oh
agree.
yeah, but you go into the Senate, and I brief there all the time, and I'm telling you, it doesn't look like any other faction of society.
Right.
It is essentially made up of very very wealthy, very up in age folks
Yeah.
who just don't want to leave power. Again, if you're fully capable of doing it, I'm not saying put an age limit on it, but there's a reason why they don't want to leave.
Yeah.
Whereas, the CEO of, a Fortune 500 company, the president of a university, just go down the list
Yeah.
and you don't see the same characteristics, put it that way.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And it's a tough thing right now because this is all part of the rhetoric that we have going on right now about this. And I go back to what I think from the beginning is like you have to continually ask yourselves about these circumstances and say, is what's happening here right? The United States built itself on the idea that they were creating a form of government that could change as it needed to, right? And as they wanted it to. And, it's almost the same in my world, right? With the constitutional monarchy that is Canada, which is a parliamentary system where you can change the way these things work. And so, what I would say though, going back to our original topic though, is like, if you don't like the way that it's going violence is not the answer, right? There are ways to do this and ways to have this discourse. You and I had this conversation over the last 44 minutes, and, I don't think I made you want to get violent, but, hopefully not. But
Nope.
ultimately, I think, this is the thing, is we're talking about something that affects us all, and we should be able to talk about this. We need to be able to talk about it. It doesn't help to get polarized. It doesn't help to get radicalized. It doesn't help to get violent. But I hope somebody listening today is feeling maybe a little bit better. If you're not, I hope you find someone to talk to. But for us, I think we should probably get ready to sign off here. But it's been an interesting topic today. I think this is never going to go away because this is real life. This is stuff that happens to everybody every day. Is the politics of the world and how our societies are run. But if there's any last words you'd like to say today, Mick, why don't you give us your thoughts?
Yeah. So I guess parting shots would be pick reason over age, be reflective on yourself and whether you're adding or making it better in your pursuit of wisdom, if you want to use one of the virtues. And then lastly, if you really want to fight, join a damn gym.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, the political spectrum is not the place to do it. The political spectrum is for the benefit of society, right? Yeah. It's the laws that govern us all, right? Yeah. So, go tell the Spartans. I guess I'd leave where I started.
Absolutely. And when it comes to anger, I usually like to sign off with my head in the icebox, heart in the oven. So keep your head in a good place, and we'll go from there. So thanks a lot, Mick. Good speaking to you today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.